we could take a little fresh look at the Ten Commandments from a different viewpoint. All right. And I'm going to put something on the screen here for just for a minute, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So if you look at the screen there, you'll see it has the two columns of the Ten Commandments, right? As we would expect, but we want to look at them in a horizontal view rather than a vertical view. So instead of seeing them as two tablets, let's look at them as 5 rows. All right. And with looking at that, taking that perspective as 5 rows, so 1 and 6 are a row or a pair, 2 and 7 are a pair, 3 and 8 are a pair, 4 and 9 are a pair, and 5 and 10 are a pair. Okay. And I'm going to I'll get back to that in a little bit, but I don't think a lot of people don't like looking at text on a screen the whole time. So I'll get back to my wonderful face. And so the Ten Commandments, of course, we know there are 10 of 613, but there are 10 fundamental ones. In fact, one of the great sages, the early sages, known as Saadia Gaon, lived in the 10th century, writes that if we count the letters of the Ten Commandments, we will discover that there are 620 letters in the Ten Commandments. So what is the significance of 620? It's 1 letter per mitzvah in the Torah. So we have the 613 mitzvahs, also known as commandments in the Torah, and then there were 7 that were instituted by the sages for a total of 620. So essentially, the Ten Commandments are a foundation for all of God's law, all of God's communication to humanity. So let's just run through them quickly, just as a refresher here. The first of the 10 is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. The second is, you shall not have any other gods in my presence, which means at all. The third, do not take God's name in vain. This is particularly with respect to oaths. The fourth, remember and observe the Sabbath. The fifth, honor your father and mother. The sixth, do not murder. The seventh, do not commit adultery. The eighth, do not steal. The ninth, do not bear false witness in a court of law. And then the 10th, do not covet anything that belongs to someone else. So the truth is that if you look at them as 2 tablets, in Hebrew, the first tablet, the one with the first 5, I am the Lord your God, you shall not have any other gods, do not take God's name in vain, remember the Sabbath, and honor your father and mother, have way, way more words and letters than the second. So if their weight was measured in words or letters, the first one would outweigh the second very, very significantly. In fact, the second tablet contains 5 very short commandments. Some of them are as short as 2 words. In Hebrew, do not murder is 2 words. Do not commit adultery, 2 words. Do not steal, 2 words. Do not bear false witness, 5 words. So we don't have it's really, really short commandments on the second of the. But if we view them as rows rather than columns, so then we find it becomes a little more balanced, which means that there must be some kind of relationship between the 2 on each row. So that, for example, I am the Lord your God, do not murder. There must be some kind of connection between them. So let's take a look. I'm going to go back to the screen share. Take a look at what the Midrash says. All right, so this is right here where I'm pointing to. I am the Lord your God, do not murder. What is this analogous to? To a king of flesh and blood who entered a country and put up portraits of himself, made statues of himself, and minted coins with his image. After a while, the people of the country overturned his portraits, broke his statues, and invalidated his coins, thereby reducing the image of the king. So too, one who sheds blood reduces the image of the king, as it is written, one who spills a man's blood, etc. For in the image of God, he made man. So we see that murder, in addition to taking a life, is also dishonoring God. Because since every human is created in the divine image, therefore, killing another person is desecrating the divine image that is stamped upon them, in addition to just taking a life, which is pretty important also. Now, most people would agree that murder is objectively wrong, I think. And yet, throughout history, we find that there have been occasions when murder was justified. I mean, we as Jewish people know that it was just some people's lifetime ago that murder of Jews was justified. It was made to be the expectation. So when we base our morality simply on our own conclusions, on what we as humans decide is reasonable or logical or rational, sometimes we can draw improper conclusions like the Nazis did in Germany. And that's why it's important that such simple and obvious laws like do not murder are included in the Ten Commandments. You would think the Ten Commandments should be reserved for the ones that are not obvious, for the ones that need a little support. And yet God used 5 of them for obvious commandments like do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal. And the reason is because we have to recall at all times that our first and primary motivation for not doing those things is because God said so. Because God is the arbiter of morality. And therefore, killing someone is not just objectively wrong because human beings decide that it's the case, in which case it's not really objective, it's subjective, but it's objectively wrong because God said so. And God is the arbiter of morality. And if God says murder is wrong, it's wrong. And why is it wrong? Well, there's also a reason, right? And the reason is taking another life and dishonoring the image of God that's stamped on the face of every human being. So that's row number 1. Okay, the first commandment and the 6th commandment. Any questions on that before we go to row number 2? Okay. So the second row is you shall not have any other gods. Do not commit adultery. I think that one is pretty obvious, right? Adultery means that you wander outside of your committed relationship to find fulfillment in whatever type of fulfillment one seeks elsewhere outside of your commitment. And clearly, idolatry is exactly the same thing. We made a commitment to God. God made a commitment to us. If we seek fulfillment, religious fulfillment, or whatever it might be, outside of that commitment, then we're violating our commitment that we made to God. So idolatry and adultery is, in fact, identical, if you think of it. There's a verse in Jeremiah where Jeremiah says, I remember the kindness of your youth, your bridal love, following after me in the desert in an unsown land, where God tells the Jewish people that when we were young, when we were a newly courting couple, right after the Exodus, you followed me into the desert with no plan on how you were going to be taken care of. You trusted in me entirely, and he refers to that as bridal love. It's like, a wide-eyed couple that are just going into life together, knowing that they're going to be there for each other and that it's going to work out because they have each other. And that was our commitment to God at the time of the Exodus. We came to Mount Sinai and everything was, we were all in on that commitment. And then what happens? sometimes, unfortunately, it happens sometimes where people lose their passion for their commitment, for the marriage, for their relationship, and they start to wander and look elsewhere. And that's what God is telling us here. You shall not have any other gods before me. You don't need to find meaning or fulfillment anywhere else, because what we have with each other, this commitment that we have, this marriage that we committed to at Mount Sinai, beginning with the Exodus, culminating at Mount Sinai, there is nothing more special than that. And just like in any marriage where it starts off, you're passionately in love and it's all about, there's an idealistic commitment. And then the love settles down into, look what we've built together, the home, the family, the life we've invested, whether it's financially or emotionally or all of the above. We have kids, we have a house, we have a life, and we love each other. And it's a different kind of love. So it's like this, you settle into that. And then if God forbid, there's someone that wanders outside of that commitment, that upsets everything that was built between them. And that's what God is telling us, that do not have any other gods is basically do not commit adultery. So any questions on that row before we move on? No. Okay. Yvonne, if you have a question, you're going to speak up or type it in to the chat. All right.
She types it into the chat.
What's that? Type it in? Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Great. Okay, excellent. All right. So moving on to commandment, to row number 3. So let me just set the background here for Stuart, who was just joining us.
That's actually my mother, Sandra.
What's that?
I think that's my mother, Sandra.
Okay.
My dad's phone.
All right. Well, welcome, Sandra. We're talking about the 10 Commandments, and we're talking about the 10 Commandments from a horizontal perspective. We're reviewing them not as columns, but as rows. So instead of seeing them as 2 tablets of 5 each, we're looking at them as 5 rows of 2 each. And so we talked about row number 1, which is the first and the 6th. I am the Lord your God, paired up with do not murder. We talked about row number 2 being do not have any other gods, paired up with do not commit adultery. And now we're about to talk about the 3rd row, which is do not take God's name in vain, paired up with do not steal. So this is the one that's interesting, because if we think about it, everything in this world belongs to God. So what you have is God's, what I have is God's. Nothing is really mine or yours. So we don't, in the ultimate reality of things, we don't really have private or personal property. Obviously, in the way our society is set up, private property is an important component, and it's true. It is, especially between humans. We need to have the notion of private property. But from the standpoint of our relationship with God, there is no such thing as private property. We're all basically, whatever we have belongs to God, like Psalm 24 says, to the Lord is the world and everything in it. So it's all God's. So if that's the case, what would be this idea of stealing from someone being an issue? So I'm gonna pull up I want to pull up the text here on the screen so that you can see it, and we'll read that together. So we're looking at number 3 here, where it says, do not take God's name in vain, do not steal. The Torah, Leviticus, refers to financial fraud as a betrayal of God. Because, explains Rabbi Akiva, in defrauding his fellow, one is defrauding the third party to their dealings. The world and all it contains is God's, as Psalm states. Rabbi Akiva interprets this verse to be saying, He, meaning God, acquired and bequeathed, and he rules his world. So I'm going to stop the share here, and I see someone's raised their hand. You got a question?
I'm not sure they did that on purpose.
Okay. All right. No worries.
Mom, did you have a question? You raised the. I'm just going to fill it with that. She's not. You can see my nephew is trying to help her get this set up.
No worries. No worries. All good. All right. So how do we understand this? If God owns everything, how could there be stealing from one person to another? And what's this deal with this third party that we're talking about with God? Okay. So let's say there's two people in a business relationship. All right. There's person A and person B, and they agree to be honest with each other. And the reason why they need to be honest with each other, in addition to that it's the right thing between people, but it's also because there's a third party to their business agreement, and that's God, who really owns the property of both of them, but has somehow in his providence assigned this to person A and this to person B. So when I take what belongs to someone else, I'm stealing what God gave to that person. And why is that important? How is that defrauding God? So let's think about what the spiritual take is on material possessions. All right, we all go through our life acquiring stuff, right? We have consumerism, we have materialism, we go through life buying things. We buy a house, we buy a car, we buy clothing, we buy furniture, we buy accessories, gadgets, and so on and so forth. And then we acquire things in the nature of our business. We acquire property or merchandise or financial assets, and so on and so forth. What is the purpose of all of these acquisitions? What are we meant to be doing with all this, in addition to enjoying life, which is a wonderful thing? And I highly recommend that everyone try their best to enjoy their life and whatever they have. No point in going through life depressed. It's good to enjoy what you have. But at the same time, it's important for us to be mindful that what we have is given to us for a deeper purpose. And the deeper purpose is revealing the true ownership of everything that exists. So let's remember that's verse in Psalms, to the Lord, the earth and everything in it, right? That God is the owner of all, of everything, of all. The problem is when we go through life, we don't necessarily observe that everything we encounter belongs to God. Most things appear to be neutral, either to belong to someone else or don't yet have an owner, or are open to transitioning from one person's ownership to another through acquisition, through purchase, etc. And we don't necessarily notice, recognize, or acknowledge that all of this belongs to God. So how do we move from that absence of acknowledgement of God's ownership to making that a meaningful part of our existence? And the answer to that is when we utilize the things that we have, the stuff that we have, for an elevated purpose. So for example, we have financial assets. We use that to help people. You give tzedakah, or you support an organization that does good things, or you buy something that you're going to use to honor the Sabbath or a holiday. You buy a nice silver menorah for Hanukkah, or you buy a beautiful etrog for Sukkot, or a shofar for the Rosh Hashanah, and so on and so forth, all the Passover things that we need. When we use our resources in the service of God, what we're actually doing is restoring those things to their rightful owner. So essentially what we are in life is we are managers. God gives things to us to manage. And as long as we're doing the right thing with it, then we can continue managing with benefits. And the benefits are that we can also enjoy and use what was given to us to manage on God's behalf. What happens when I take something from somebody else? So then I actually robbed that person of the opportunity to manage what was given to him or her by God. So I'm not just stealing from the other person, I'm stealing from the real owner, because the real owner was expecting person A to do good things with the assets that they're managing on God's behalf. By person B stealing from person A, I'm robbing that person of the opportunity to do good things with those resources, and I'm robbing the real owner, God, of the opportunity for good things to happen with those resources. Because by stealing, I've done the exact opposite. I've done bad things with those resources. So we've gone from declaring God as the real owner by doing good things with our resources to denying God's ownership by doing bad things with our resources. So that is the explanation of row number 3. Any questions on that?
So in that vein, how does stealing from a store steal from God? If it's
Stealing from a store?
Yes. So if somebody were stealing from like something from, say, a Walmart, a big store like that, a big corporate store,
Right.
how
Sure.
how is that God's purpose that they're stealing from some item from the store?
So that store has an owner, right? Whether it's an individual or a corporation that is owned by individuals. And those people were tasked by God to do good things with their resources. And by stealing from the store, which translates into stealing from a person, because there are no corporations, there are people who make up those corporations, we're doing that exact same thing. The fact that that person has more than they can ever use is not an excuse. Let me tell you a little story. Okay, I think the story might clarify that point a little, because that's a good point. A lot of times we don't view as stealing from a corporation as egregious as stealing from an individual who might be needy. About 200 years ago, there was a rabbi in Poland who was known as the Apter Rav. He was the rabbi of Apta, which is a town in Poland. And one day, one of his Hasidim, one of his followers, came to him and he said, "Rabbi, I have a problem. I'm a poor person. My daughter is getting ready to get married, and I have nothing, no resources to set her up in her new home. I need to buy her bedding and, some plates and a bed or some beds and even just some food to have the wedding celebration. I have nothing. I don't know what to do." So the rabbi says to him, "Look, I'm going to write you a letter, and you go to one of my Hasidim who's very wealthy. And in the letter, I'm going to ask him to give you 300 rubles, which at that time was sufficient to set the daughter up for her new marriage. And hopefully he'll help you and everything will be okay." So he takes the letter and he's really happy, thanks the rabbi, and he goes off to that village where that other person lives. He presents the letter to him, and the wealthy man looks at the letter and he says, I am a follower of this rabbi, but this is a lot of money, and I can't just be dictated to what to do with my money. So I'm sorry, I can only give you 100 rubles. So the poor man said, "Look, I really appreciate your generous offer, but the Rebbe said I should get 300 rubles from you. So I don't feel like I can take 100 and be faithful to his instructions. So I'm going to go back and see what he said." So he gets back in his horse and wagon, travels back to Apta, and he says to the rabbi, "This and this is what happened. So the rabbi says, that's interesting. You know what? I'm going to write you a letter to another one of my followers who's not quite as wealthy. He can give you 200, but at least he'll give you the 200 willingly. So he takes the letter. He goes to the second fellow who is wealthy, but not quite on the level of the first one. And he happily gives him 200 rubles. He goes home and he gets his daughter set up. And all right. A short time afterwards, the first wealthy fellow started to encounter problems in his business. A deal fell through. He had a fire in one of his factories. A barge that was carrying some merchandise sunk. This is all before insurance. So a loss was a loss. And things were just going south. He started to lose everything to the point where he couldn't even make ends meet. In the meantime, the second fellow started to have the Midas touch. Every deal that he encountered started going really well. The first guy realized, he says, ever since I refused to do what the rabbi asked me, things have not gone well for me. So let me travel to the rabbi and, apologize and say, ask him to restore the blessing of being comfortable and well off. So he travels to Apta and he says, Rebbe, I understand that I didn't follow your instructions to give the 300 rubles to charity, but for that I deserve to be impoverished? So the rabbi says to him, let me tell you something. I want to tell you a little background. He says, when I was a young man, I had a dream, and an angel came to me in the dream and told me that when I became an adult, I would be very wealthy. Now, since I was a person of a spiritual bent, I didn't really care for material wealth. In fact, I felt it would be a distraction to me for what I was looking for in life. So I asked if the blessing of wealth that was intended for me could be distributed to my followers at my discretion. In other words, instead of me being wealthy, let some of my chassidim, my followers, be wealthy, and they'll do with my money as I advise them. And you, he says to the fellow standing in front of him, were one of the people that was assigned to be the recipient of some of that wealth. As long as you were doing with my money what I thought was right, then you were entitled to also benefit from it by living a comfortable life. But as soon as you refused to do with my money what I thought was right, which is to help someone else and give tzedakah, well, then I needed to find a better banker. And I found the other guy who listened. So all of your wealth transferred to him because simply I didn't like your bank anymore. I chose to take my business elsewhere. So the chassid apologized and he says, look, Rebbe, I didn't understand all this. I'm going to change. He says, look, what happened. I'll give you a blessing that you shouldn't be poor, but I'm not transferring my wealth back to you. So the point of the story is that in essence, we're all bankers for God. Whatever resources we have were given to us for the purpose of doing the right thing with them. But if we opt to not do what God wants with the resources, then essentially we're robbing our investor of the resources that he entrusted us with. So if, as a human, and especially as a Jew who looks at the Torah and sees, so this idea of taking God's name in vain, right, which is commandment number 3, is the idea that we acknowledge that God is not in vain, right? That he is, that when we engage in business that requires giving our word, taking an oath of trustworthiness, that we don't just throw it around, that we don't take it for granted. And that includes doing with our resources what God wants us to. So certainly not misappropriating what belongs to someone else, as well as making sure on a positive note that we actually do good things with the resources that we were gifted so that our investor sees us as a worthy banker for his resources. Does that clarify it a little? Does that answer the question a little? Okay. Any other questions on row number 3 before we go to row number 4? So we're talking about the 10 commandments, looking at them as 5 rows rather than 2 columns, and seeing how each commandment on the first tablet connects to or mirrors, reflects one of the commandments on the second tablet. So we're up to row number 4, where it says, remember the Sabbath, do not bear false witness. So let's take a look. I'm going to go back to the sharing the screen so we can take a look at the text. This is taken mostly from the Talmud and the Midrash. And the text reads as follows. Remember the Sabbath, do not bear false witness. Whoever observes the Sabbath becomes a partner with God in creation. As the Baal Shem Tov teaches, God transforms spirituality into physicality in creating the world, and it is the role of the Jew to make things that are physical into spiritual. Whereas the Midrash teaches, one who violates the Sabbath testifies before he who spoke the world into being that he did not create his world in 6 days and he did not rest on the 7th. But one who observes the Sabbath testifies before he who spoke the world into being that he created his world in 6 days and he rested on the 7th, as it is written in Isaiah, you are my testifiers, or my witnesses, says the Lord. So what we see from this is that somehow there's a correlation between Sabbath and testimony about God as creator. Now, what does it mean to be a partner with God? Partnership implies some level of equality. So how is it possible to be a partner with God? And yet, God tells us that through keeping the Shabbat and doing the right things in his world, we become a partner with God. But what does this mean? So it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, the idea of that we were put here for a purpose. And that purpose is to do the right things with the world that God created, to take the resources that we were given and do the right thing with them. Because the way God created the world, there's something called concealment. When we walk around our universe, walk around our earth, we don't see God everywhere. In fact, we don't see him at all. It's a challenge to find God in the world. We have to work hard, think about it, meditate, contemplate, be spiritual to discover God within our universe. But the more good we do, the more we reveal God in the universe. And that's symbolized by the Sabbath, because the whole idea of Shabbat is that we take a regular day and we turn it into something elevated. It's just another day of the week, and yet we regard it differently. We act differently, we eat differently, we dress differently. We do things to indicate that this is an elevated day, that this is a day unlike the other 6. And in that same sense, we try to do that with the rest of the world. We try to bring the world to a state of elevation, where everything can be holy, everything can be godly, every encounter, every relationship, every choice that we make can be an elevated one when we're mindful of bringing God into our choices, into our relationships, into our actions, into our business, into our family, into our friendships, our social life. There can be a godly component in all of that, depending on what choices we make, how we opt to conduct ourselves. You know, there's a beautiful teaching about marriage, the idea that in Hebrew, the word for man is ish. The word for woman is isha. It's almost the same letters, except there's one difference. In the male term, there's a yud, and in the female term, there's a hey. Now, the leftover letters in each word is aish, which means fire. So what we're saying is that a male is aish, fire, plus yud. A female is aish, fire, plus hey. When we put the yud and the hey together, that's the name of the divine. That's God's name. So a marriage with God is a divine fire. Leave God out of it, and then we're left with conflict, right? So, and that's the same in every aspect of life. It becomes beautiful, it becomes meaningful, it becomes elevated when we bring a divine component into every encounter, every relationship, every choice, every business move, every decision, every social interaction. And that's the idea of living a mindful living, a mindful life. And Shabbat epitomizes that, because on Shabbat, it's an entire 24 hours of mindful living, of being more connected to God than we are the rest of the week. So even though Shabbat is only one day, what we're really trying to do is make every day Shabbat, in the sense that every day should be mindful and elevated and godly and more considerate, more spiritual. And it doesn't mean we become monks living on a mountaintop, disconnected from the enjoyment of everyday life. Not at all. What it means is we bring godliness and spirituality into our everyday activities. So there's no such thing as mundane. Everything could be holy. Everything could be godly. Our marriage, our friendships, our parenting, our being a child to somebody, our being a friend, being a business partner, an employee, an employer, a student, a teacher, whatever the relationship is, whatever the activity that a person's engaged in, it could all be elevated and godly if we choose to do so. So any questions on that before we go on to the last row? Okay, so now we're at row number 5, where we have honor your father and mother and do not covet. Now, there's a pattern that you might have noticed, and that is that the first 5, the first column, are pretty much aspects of life that govern our relationship with God. The second column governs aspects of life that deal with our relationship with other humans. Do not murder, that's interpersonal. Do not commit adultery, interpersonal. Do not steal, do not bear false witness. And the same is true with the first column. I am the Lord your God. Do not have any other gods. Don't take God's name in vain. Honor the Sabbath. And all of a sudden, we have this anomaly. Honor your father and mother. So is that about God, or is that about interpersonal? It would seem that that's in the wrong column. Because honor your father and mother is between you and your parents, all humans. On the other hand, do not covet. Covet means when you desire something in your mind or heart. Someone else has stuff. I want that stuff. Who knows about that? If you never act on that desire, who knows about it? Only God. So you almost think those two should be swapped. Do not covet should be in the first column, because it deals more with your integrity with God, because only God knows that you're desiring something that someone else has. And honor your father and mother should be in the second column, because in reality, that's something between you and 2 other humans, your parents. So why are they switched? Why are they seemingly in the wrong column? And the answer is, our obligation to honor our parents stems from the fact that they partnered with God to bring us into being. Look, we all know where babies come from, all right? They don't come from Turo, and they don't come from storks, despite what the advertising will tell you, okay? But they also don't just come from an intimate relationship between a man and a woman, because we also know that millions of people are trying to have babies and doing everything that they need to do from a biological standpoint, and it doesn't happen. Because there needs to be a third partner. The decision for a conception to work is really in the hands of God. And that third partner provides a vital component to the existence of the child. Whereas the parents conceive the child's body, right, through the DNA that they contribute and the genetics, right? That's what they're giving the child. But God gives the child a soul. So in fact, in conception, there's three partners. There's the mother, there's the father, and there's God. And each provides a different component of that child. God provides the soul. So when we honor our parents, not because they take care of us, and not because they love us, although hopefully they do all that, we honor them because they gave us existence. Essentially, we're remembering that they partnered with that third infinite partner, God, to give us existence. And without God's involvement in that, it wouldn't have happened. So by honoring our parents, we actually are honoring God, whose involvement in that union brought us into being and gave us a soul. So it's not an interpersonal thing. It's actually a relationship with God. And the parents play a role in that. They were partners in bringing us into being. When it comes to do not covet, we mistakenly think that our thoughts don't have an impact on other people. You know, there's a famous quote from Jimmy Carter, "I lust in my heart." And there's a lot of people that say, well, as long as I don't do anything, speaking about someone or thinking about someone in a negative way is no big deal. And what the Ten Commandments teach us, the fact that do not covet is in the second column, teaches us that the power of thought and the power of words, just thinking about something in an inappropriate way, leaves an impact. It might be an almost indiscernible impact, but it leaves an impact. And so desiring something that is someone else's blurs the lines between my relationship with God versus my relationship with others. And that's why it's placed in that column. It instructs us that do not fool yourself into thinking that your thoughts don't have an impact. That if you say something, even more, right? If you say something, that it doesn't have an impact. Words have an impact. Words have meaning. Thoughts have meaning. And everything, every energy, every vibe that we put into the universe, that we put into the atmosphere, lasts and has an impact. And therefore, we need to be careful, not just when we do things, but even when we say things and even when we think things. Because all three of those forms of expression are the tools that our soul uses to articulate, to express itself. So that's why these two were switched. The honor your father and mother was put into the God column, and the do not covet was put into the people column because of the impact that our thoughts have on another person and our relationship with them. Any questions?
No questions, but I think that is such a powerful one, because it's true that this coveting just, it, even if you don't voice it, it emanates out from the person and affects people around. And I think in today's world for children, I mean, I see this with, and not only children, adults also with social media. There's so much coveting because people post all these things on social media that life looks so beautiful for them. And for so many teenagers and children, they don't know how to express that they have this feeling, these feelings of wanting what the others don't have. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that it has led to a lot of teenage suicide and a lot of issues in today's world where people don't know how to deal with these feelings.
Yeah.
and and as a, some adults might express it or they don't, and they make other people uncomfortable, whereas children might feel it, and if they don't discuss it with their parents, they don't know how to deal with those feelings, and they can be so overwhelming, and
Yeah.
they do emanate out.
Yeah. Yeah. So people are catching up with what the Torah has known for 3,333 years.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I got for today. I think we've pretty much filled our hour here,
That was wonderful.
and I'm glad to spend it with you all. Looking forward to being in person, maybe the next time if everything
Hopefully in
goes
a couple
well.
of months we will
Yeah.
be back there. I think we're all vaccinated and we can resume
Yeah. Yeah.
getting back together again soon. Thank you so much for coming out and
Okay. Have
doing
a
this.
wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.